Hey folks, welcome to the Artificially Intelligent Coffee Chats. This is the first in a series of conversations with people thinking about AI, whether they're affected community, developers, researchers, policymakers, etc. In this video, we're going to be hearing from Itria, who I met through an open course on the technical approaches to ensuring that artificial intelligence has a positive impact. She's going to tell us about why global perspectives are important in AI and why she thinks benevolent AI is an area deserving more thought. I'll let her introduce herself.
So my name is Itria Bonansinga. She, her pronouns, woman. So I'm from the Midwest originally, Springfield, Illinois, which is like a capital city, but Illinois is very flat. And so I think that's part of the reason why I've always really loved mountains. Um,
Ah,
yeah, but so I was in Illinois from the time I was born until the time I finished college. I like went to school at the state school in Southern Illinois. I'm from a really large family. I'm like the second oldest of eight children. So it's like, yeah, pretty big. So I studied math in school. I originally was like a biochemistry student and I worked in a biochemistry lab during COVID. But I realized that I didn't really love the wet lab work and I thought math was really interesting. So I finished doing mathematics and then after that, got a job in San Francisco doing finance. And so I lived there for about two years at the first job. Um, and then, I was feeling a little bit restless, and so I decided to walk across the country. So I like left my job, and then I hiked the PCT, which is this like 2,500 mile trail that goes from the Mexican U.S. border to the Canada U.S. border. And after that, I like did some hitchhiking and other sort of maybe not so smart activities. And yeah, and then after that, I went back to San Francisco, got another job. Um, and that was really when I think like a lot of the advancements that had been happening in artificial intelligence became, more apparent to me than they already were. Um, and that's when I decided that I think like AI safety is probably the best use of my time. Yeah.
I would love to hear more about the PCT, but I think we got to keep it on track. So remind me where you are again. You're in
Mhm.
Vietnam, am I correct?
I'm in Thailand right now,
Thailand,
actually.
darn it.
Yeah, I'm in Thailand. But I was in Vietnam when we did the course, so
Ah,
yeah.
okay.
So it's been yeah, traveling, yeah.
Okay. Well, what is the best meal that if I were with you right now that I could get around there that I might not find
Oh,
somewhere else?
well, I think really like the thing that I love most about Thailand, I was like reading this article the other day. Like I'm specifically based in Bangkok, but I'm not in Bangkok right now. Um, is that like the whole city is the best restaurant you've ever had? I
Mm,
think that that's true of like all the places in Thailand is that there's just so much really great street food that you kind of can just like walk by and eat, and it's all really high quality. I would say as like a good Bangkok recommendation, there's this like maybe Burmese Thai like soup place um that I really really love in like Siloam area by like the St. Louis BTS stop. Yeah, so if anybody's in Bangkok, that's like amazing. One of the best meals I've ever had, and I eat it as often as I can.
very cool. Okay. And if I were to walk around like looking for a scene to paint,
Mhm.
what vignette
Mm,
of this area should I pick? And like
yeah,
try to
so
describe the scene in as much detail as you could.
yeah, so I'm in Pai right now, which is this like kind of little hippie vacation town in northern Thailand. It's like about 3 hours south of Chiang Mai. And northern Thailand is a lot more mountainous and rugged. And so there's like all of these super, super lush green mountains out here. And yeah, I think really like if you can find a spot where you can get a little bit of coverage, there are these like just like super, super foliaged mountains with like a bunch of mist rolling off of them. Yeah, they're super pretty. Probably wouldn't be that fun to hike because of the humidity and bugs and everything like that. But yeah, definitely good to paint.
But a very nice landscape. All right, cool.
Yeah.
And so you've told me a little bit about where you are. Why
Mhm.
is this place important to you, if it is? And what took you to
Yeah.
Thailand?
Yeah. I would say, so Partially, this is like kind of a cop out because I feel like everybody says this about everywhere that they like, but I really like the people. Like I think
Mm.
Thai people are very friendly and they're very like kind of open, accepting, and it's a little bit of like no one really cares too deeply about what other people are doing, which I think has some pros and some cons to it. But yeah, I think really like the reason that I came here primarily is that there were some like external factors that we talked about earlier, but um, I think it's like a really great place to like be around other kind of international people and be able to like kind of sit and really work on something deeply without having to have the stress of like, when I was living in San Francisco, my rent was really, really expensive. And so you kind of feel this like constant pressure to maybe not necessarily be able to like focus on what you want to focus, but like to have to get something to work right then and there. And so I think the thing that is really special to me about Thailand is that you have a lot of like kind of some ambition around you, but there's a lot less pressure to
Mm.
you can kind of be a little bit more deep in the things that you're doing.
Yeah, that's cool. I think in my own experience as well, living in the Bay Area, there are
Mhm.
times where it really can feel like, yeah, you're having to choose what to do or maybe how you go about things in order
Yeah.
to pay the the bills and
Yeah,
uh not because you think it's important per se.
totally. And I also think, I mean, there's a lot that I really love about San Francisco, and there's a lot I really love about the people in San Francisco. But there is something to be said that if you really want to do something different, you have to like get yourself in a different headspace. And I think the Bay can sometimes be maybe sort of semi-homogenous in its thinking. Um, and I think
Mm.
there can be like a lot of status games that are played sometimes, you know? And so I think it's nice to like get a little bit of a breather out of that. Yeah.
All right, very cool. Okay, so you started to describe how upon, I guess, returning to SF,
Yeah.
you were thinking that AI safety is an important
Yeah.
use of your time. And so what in particular brought you to thinking about AI?
Yeah. So I had been working in finance during like the release of ChatGPT. So it was like in the water before I left my first job. I think like the Aschenbrenner situational awareness paper also was like came out around that time. So I remember reading that for work. And to be honest, I was pretty skeptical about a lot of stuff. I mean, this was back when like everybody was saying then, but again, it was like maybe hard to believe like that this is the worst it's ever going to be. But I think it was kind of easy to like when I was in school, this might be a little bit of a roundabout answer, but when I was in school, I did a lot of like statistics work and like statistical learning coursework was like my favorite, like a lot of stochastic processes and probability and that sort of thing. And I'd been really interested in machine learning. And I remember reading, maybe it was like some like Reddit thread or something. I was like trying to figure out what I wanted to kind of concentrate on after school. And artificial intelligence had been something I was interested in, but I like read this comment that was like, well, every generation thinks they've cracked artificial intelligence. Every generation thinks that it's like this time they've done it. And I think that kind of, along with some of the things I was seeing, like it just gave me a bit of a natural skepticism. Um, so when I left my job, I was starting to see like, okay, things are like this maybe is a phase shift that is relevant in a way that previous ones haven't been to the same degree. And then like I did the PCT, so I just went into the woods for half of a year, like I would come out every so often and I would hear like bits and pieces of news, but it was really like I didn't have service for most of the time, and I was like in these like very small towns where it feels like everything's like 5 or 10 years earlier than it is right now. And yeah, and so I would get these bits and pieces. Like there was one of my friends, he came in, he had started like maybe a month later than me, and I was talking to him, and he was talking a lot about like ChatGPT, and it was just like sort of foreign the way that he was talking about it, seeing that even in like a short amount of time, it seems like things had progressed. And then, of course, finally, when I got out of the trail and like back into normal society, I was really like hit with um, the magnitude of progress that had been made in like that short period of time. Um, and so then I think from that point until uh yeah, until a little bit into my second job that I was working at, I think just it became really undeniable like how much the technology had changed, how significant this was going to be, and also like how real the risks were, that this was something that was uh very, very capable, more capable than I had imagined. Um, and with capability, I think comes risk, especially when it's concentrated so heavily within like, the kind of infrastructure build out that needs to happen. But I know this has been a bit of a ramble, but one other thing I want to add too that I think is kind of relevant to all of this is that at my first job, when I was getting ready to leave, uh, I'm pretty sure I can say this, but I just won't say any specifics. But we had been looking at this big data center project, that was like just starting to get like data centers were at that point the really big real estate, like, you know, now they're even bigger. But at that time, that's like they were really becoming the real estate flavor of the month, decade, year, whatever. Um, and I remember I had been talking to one of the like managing directors about the data center build out, and he was like very, very skeptical about it, like was really not sure if the deal structure was good, blah, 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 blah. And then when I came back in at my second job, it was like everybody could not get enough of data centers. It was like any
Mm.
any kind of initial skepticism that was present there, like in that first wave had just completely evaporated, and it was like full speed ahead. Yeah, yeah.
It's interesting that you brought up how people have said AI would be around the corner for like decades.
Yeah,
I maybe a century at this point. And
yeah, yeah.
it also seems like people have also said that, at least in the past several years, the AI bust would be around the corner in the
Yeah,
next couple months.
yeah, totally.
Of course, these are very different timescales, but
hmm
it's just an interesting thing to think about sometimes, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah. I also like something I've been thinking, like, because something I've been thinking a lot, because again, I wasn't really like a financial markets person for most of my life. That wasn't really something that was kind of a part of my world. But after working in the space for a couple of years, something I've realized is that um, like people say like most retail traders lose money, right? Which is true. Like, most retail traders lose money. And so in a way, there's like a real signal in that like if you're trying to lose money, probably you're gonna make money. Like in this sort of like weird convoluted way. So something I've been thinking a lot with the like the you know AI boom and bust talks is that in a lot of ways, like what what your friends who don't really know anything are talking about, like that is exactly in a way exactly opposite probably where the truth actually lies. Again, it's not always like a perfect one-to-one, but I would say like I was pretty cynical about AI stuff right at the beginning. And then as soon as I started to hear all of this bubble talk, I was like, I think there's like maybe something more there. Um yeah, and
Interesting. Okay.
yeah. So again, like there's kind of more to that, but I think like at a naive level there's something there that I think sometimes people miss. Yeah.
Can you break that down a little bit for me? So
Yeah.
the first part was, uh, can you just refresh my memory
Yeah.
of what this is from financial stuff where like most of the traders
hmm
underperform the market, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Most like so yeah, so most like if you're just like an average Joe and you open up a Robinhood account or whatever and you tell yourself I'm going to start trading stocks, and maybe you go on like Wall Street bets or whatever, and like you want to you
hmm
want to make your fortune trading stocks or options or what have you. If you take like 100,000 of those people, most of them are going to be negative after, let's call it a year, probably
Mhm.
even a shorter time frame. But most people are not going to make money, or at the very least, like most people are not going to outperform the market,
Mhm.
generally speaking. So something that's true, like something that you can get from that, because these markets are all zero sum games. It's like if somebody's losing money, somebody's making money. Generally, what ends up happening is that you have these big, like hedge fund market making institutions like Jane Street, Citadel, Optiver. If you're trading options, like these big guys are usually the ones that are winning when retail traders are losing. And so generally what happens in that is that if you have a certain retail sentiment, you kind of have to take the opposite sentiment position on like the other end of the trade. If one person thinks something's undervalued and so they want to buy it, then the other person kind of, you know, less or more has to believe that it's overvalued and wants to sell it. So I think that there's another like kind of non-financial thing that I think is useful in thinking about all of these things, which is I'm a big like philosophy head. Like I really, really love reading philosophy. And when I was in college, I got really into this like French psychoanalyst, Jacques Lacan. And Lacan has this one, he was like sort of master of like just saying contrarian speak, basically. And one thing that he said was les non dupés errant, which just translates to like those who are not duped err. So it's sort of like if you think you're smarter than everybody else, like all the people who are like, oh, this is a big bubble, this is a big bubble. Well, really, you're kind of missing something. It's like the Keynesian idea of like after the financial crisis, the banker who was really like that you can look back and say, oh, he was actually behaving in a smart way was the one that ended up losing everything, that had to be bailed out. So there's like a
Mm.
way in which going along with consensus can be um yeah, it can be negative depending on like yeah. I don't know if that's like totally a great explanation, but I think it's like generally if everybody around you believes something and those people are not like the top of the top of the top, then probably you should look a little deeper and you should try to challenge your assumptions.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the last bit there that I was sort of summarizes what I was getting from that is that
Hmm.
maybe there being like a collective belief in something is not
Hmm.
evidence that you should believe the opposite, but it's at
Hmm.
least evidence that you should investigate further. That
Yeah.
if people are, and especially
Hmm.
if they're like non-experts, if people
Yes.
are have like a passing interaction with something
Hmm.
and all seem to have coalesced in a certain belief, then
Yeah.
it's like, well, where did that actually come from?
Yeah, and I'll say one more thing and then we can move on. And the last thing I'll say is that like also I think something that is sometimes missed in this like bubble discourse is that like you can have a situation where it's a bubble like I think a great example is you look at the dot-com bubble. Like that was a bubble. Valuations came crashing down. But actually if you zoom out a little bit more, you would have been right, even like going into that bubble. Like if you had in 2000 decided I'm going to go all in on, computer hardware and software and the internet and all of these things, you would have been right, but you just had to like move your time frame out a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. And I suppose maybe because my understanding of the bubble is so grounded
Hmm.
in like the dot com
Hmm.
era that to me it always reads as the bubble just being an issue of time
Yes,
frame for the investment. Like
definitely.
investors want a payout in a certain amount of time
Yes.
and they put the valuation based on that. It's kind of maybe it's related, it's correlated to
Hmm.
whether or not there's actual uh, technology there, but
Yes,
they want it faster than people can actually deliver, and that's kind of what
definitely.
causes the
definitely.
the dissonance.
Also, this is not financial advice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
especially coming from me.
Yeah. Yeah, not financial advice. Yeah.
Well, okay, so taking a couple
Yeah.
steps back, reflecting on the past couple of years, how do you think
Mhm.
the implementation of AI like systems has gone?
Mhm. Mhm. Well, I think it well, so I think like my initial reaction to that is it's been poor, but I think poor by design. Like I think maybe when we were in the course together, I had shared that article. This is a really good article, by the way, if anyone's watching and wants to read it. It's I think called like From the Dynamo to the Computer. Um, and basically it was written in 1990, and the like general thesis is that in 1990, if you like walked outside, you would see the computer everywhere, except in the productivity statistics. It was like this is by the way, this is a point that I'm borrowing from Ali, I can't remember his last name, the Databricks CEO. He like explains this much better. So if anyone wants to check him out, that's I think he's like really articulate in this specific area. Um, but basically the idea is that like I mean it's pretty crazy if you think about it. Like we've had like AI pretty much a super intelligent AI. Maybe not like specifically super intelligent, but you take out Claude or you take out ChatGPT and it's smarter than most people I know. Like the average person I pluck from my life just randomly, if I ask them about a certain topic and then I ask the AI, like the AI is generally more intelligent on a vast array of topics than most people I know. Probably I would still ask my mathematician friend about, knot theory and, again, like there are all these caveats, but generally speaking, it's pretty remarkable how crazy these AI systems are now. But in a lot of ways, nothing has really changed, like we've had some software stock sell off, and now probably you have a better Google search in your pocket and you can get recipes a little bit easier. But like by and large, things have not really manifested on the high end or even on the low end. We've had some hacking, like the Hugging Face OpenAI hacking situations. We've had like, but there hasn't, I think like the some of the Grok stuff that's coming out about like the images that it created, like that's a pretty horrible, I think, adverse, adverse thing that has come out of it. But I would say on both bounds, it feels like things have both not been as good and not been as bad as they could have been. Um, so I don't know if like that's kind of the area that you're looking for, like the implementation side of things. But I would say, yeah, I guess like to bring the point home is that in my mind, I think one of the real strengths of getting into the field now, and especially getting into the safety field now, is I think both ends of that band are going to move out a lot. I think things are going to get a lot better and they're going to get a lot worse.
Mm,
Um, so I think that like in the same way that like a lot of the benefits and a lot of the harms that have come from computer technology took way longer than anyone expected to actually materialize in the world. I think the same is going to be true of this technology, that the good and the bad are going to get exponentially further apart. And but it's going to be slower. I think it's going to be slower than a lot of people are thinking.
yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that uh, was I've said time and time again, and I will
Hmm.
continue to remind myself of at the very least, is that for a very long time in the, I guess, AI ethics literature, as it would have been
Hmm.
identified at the time, there was a concern that machine learning and algorithms would enable people to make deep fakes. Like you
Hmm.
mentioned Grok,
Yeah.
and I think that's
Yeah.
perhaps the most blatant and terrible example, but even
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
more mundane deepfakes of just like presenting parts
Hmm.
of things that look like reality but are not.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this was something that people theorized about for quite a while and were concerned
Hmm.
about. And it was eye-opening to me to see that the moment that we had, I think it was Dali,
Hmm.
the deep fakes were on the internet immediately.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
like we predicted it and it happened and it was there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think maybe the takeaway that I'm getting from that right now is
Hmm.
that if that's how we predicted one of these things, one of these
Yeah.
potential risks, that's like points in favor of we need to take the risks seriously. Even the ones
Definitely.
that sound hypothetical and that are far out,
Yeah.
that once the capability is there, the risk will be realized immediately as long as it's in anybody's interest
Yeah.
to exploit it.
Yeah.
And that's a scary thought, actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not one that I like.
Yeah, I think that's right on the money. I think that's right on the money. I mean, like again, like with the deepfake example, like I think you have this like race going on between all of these frontier models, and one of the ways that you can try to get yourself into this race is you can start cutting a bunch of corners, or you can explicitly reduce guardrails, like we saw with the like Grok example. Yeah, and I think like I mean, a lot of the stuff that I had read about had been pretty bad. I think some of the stuff that I've read recently has been even worse. And yeah, I would agree. I think that this has made me realize that it's like really easy to be a cynic, and it's really easy to say like, oh, you people are, you're getting all like, you know, upset about nothing, or you're blowing this out of proportion, or these things are science fiction and they're light years away. But it's like it's like you have to start dealing with them early, or once they're here, it's like the genie's out of the bottle.
Yeah. I think it's also easy for us to forget how how much of our modern reality was science fiction, just like maybe before I was born, but
Hmm.
not that long before then. Like in
Yeah.
my parents tell me that in Star Trek they had this thing where you could plug it into this thing in the computer and then well it wasn't even a computer, it was just like in the ship,
Hmm.
and then you move
Hmm.
it and then you plug it in somewhere else and boom, your information went from one place to another.
Yeah,
And now we transmit that through the air. Like
totally.
they could barely even conceive of that at the time.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, totally. I'm reading Neuromancer by William Gibson right now. And something I've been struck with is like exactly like what you're saying. Like there's a lot of these things that are so like they seem like so far out. And then there's also things where I'm like, oh, like we already solved that, Like, like we're already past that. So it's yeah, it's really interesting seeing how uh we can be really right in some areas and really wrong in other areas about how progress will go.
Yeah. Do you have anything in particular from Neuromancer that comes to mind?
Yeah, like one thing that I was reading about was just like I thought the kind of the attitudes that people had like so there's a lot of maybe this is a little bit less PG-13, but anyways, like for one example, like they had all these like coffin, like the coffin apartments or whatever, where you have just these like little tiny capsule hotels basically, but it's like I've stayed in a bunch of capsule hotels, and in a way, like when I was living in San Francisco, like I had a pretty similar arrangement, like it was sort of in a way like that kind of like housing density and um like yeah, like really microscopic living areas, and like kind of micro rentals and things like that. I feel like that's something that at least especially like as my kind of like semi-nomadic last couple of years, like I've been experiencing that pretty right here and right now. The other thing that I thought was sort of interesting was that, there's a lot of like substance abuse issues in the book where like all sorts of people are like, have this or that or whatever. But I think actually in a lot of ways, like that kind of like it feels maybe a little bit more archaic when you like look at it in terms of the way that like people are thinking about that sort of stuff now. Again, I'm being a little vague because I don't want to whatever. But I think reading that too like felt a little bit of like kind of a 90s throwback, in a sense. Yeah.
All right. And in a perfect world, what role do you think AI should play? So I guess we're staying on our theme of
Yeah.
a little bit sci-fi here. Like, if you could
Yeah.
write that book of the utopia, what would it look like?
Yeah. I think one thing that I feel particularly drawn to about like the potential of artificial intelligence, and I think is maybe not talked about enough, is like sometimes I think it's really easy to have like a Western centric view of the risks and benefits of AI, that like a lot of it is kind of about how is this going to change like the median American's life, I think is like sometimes where the conversation, at least like, in San Francisco, sometimes can end up is like, how is this going to impact people who are already from wealthy countries? I think the thing that to me is most interesting is that because because you can really disperse AI capabilities via the cloud pretty easily, like you have some centralized data center and then everybody can hook into it, with a Wi-Fi connection. I think the potential for allowing like an easy distribution of knowledge to poorer areas, poorer communities, I think that can be a huge, huge, huge benefit. Um, yeah, a huge, huge benefit in ways that I think people aren't talking about all the time. Something else that is maybe sort of interesting related to this is that I feel a lot more optimism around AI technologies when I'm in Asia, at least, versus when I'm in Europe or North America. Again, those are my only samples, so you know, take from that what you will. And I think part of it is because there's this sense of like there has been so much technological innovation here, or at least technological innovation has enhanced the lives of people in a significant way here. And I think the feeling is that AI is just like another step on the step function here, that like you're going to be able to have like a doctor in every community because you have this like doctor like program that can give you sound or reasonable medical advice like instantly wherever you are, as long as you have like an internet connection. Um, I think there's also like one of the issues I think over time that technology has brought is that when you have a computer, you kind of need less and less talent in order to like do what you're going to do. Like company sizes get a lot smaller. You don't necessarily need a bunch of factory workers to make software. You can just kind of hire an order of magnitude less software engineers. I think, there's ways in which AI could take this further. Like you could have even less people. But I also think there's ways in which having like each individual person, if we get it right, having each individual person have this kind of like super intelligent like helper by their side that can advocate for them, that can, like help them make good decisions, that can like, yeah, argue for them, like in all of these ways, I think that can be really beneficial in making sure that like each person has a seat at the table. Um, yeah, so I think like that's kind of my general view with artificial intelligence is that it can be a real enabler to um, increasing equality in the world, increasing equity that like most people have, and really like transforming a lot of lives for the better. Um, so I think really its role, my like kind of dream scenario is that we find a way to make it aligned, and then we also find a way to distribute it equitably. And yeah, I think in that case it can really like be a huge net positive for like everyone on the planet. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the point about distributing it equitably, I think
Hmm.
is strong as well, because that's always my concern, that these things will be gate kept by
Yeah.
some level of financial access. And I
Yeah.
think that would exacerbate inequality rather than close it. But I think if we're able to find both the technical solutions and then also, I suppose you could call them governance, but to me, it's like not
Hmm.
even specific to AI at that point. It's just
Yeah.
the way to ensure that benefits are more evenly distributed, I think
Yeah.
that would be good. So
Yeah.
yeah, why, uh, I guess you already told us a bit about why you started
Mhm,
working on AI safety. So maybe I'll move on to
mhm,
the second question, which is second question in this section,
mhm,
which is what is a common misconception that you see people having about something
mhm,
that you're working on that gets you excited?
hmm. Okay, yeah. I think this is a good example. Yeah, I think this is a good example. So kind of like with everything that we've talked about, and maybe it's no surprise that what I'm really interested in is multi-agent systems, AI economics, like uh how like AI systems will kind of interact in like market economies, but also just generally as like groups of different agents coming together. Um, so one thing that I think is interesting is I like endlessly quote this paper just because I find it really fascinating. Is there was this researcher out of ETH Zurich who he wrote a paper. It's something called like uh it's like uh contract design is not enough, prosociality and AI agents, something like this. And basically his like really his main point was that um sometimes sometimes I think we get like a little too fixated on the alignment question of like how do you take some desire and then map a function that creates some intended action, with this agent. Like how do you make sure that this function is like as specific as possible? It maintains all of the relevant information here and it like doesn't cause any problems in its transmission. But what I found really interesting about the paper is that basically he showed like in almost a naive way what you can do is instead of having to make sure that this alignment function doesn't lose any information, that it's perfectly mapped, something else you can kind of do is you can just make sure that the person receiving it is like wants a positive outcome for everybody, that is pro-social, like has this like sort of their maximization function isn't like a personal maximization of their own utility, but is rather like how can I maximize utility for the group? Like how can I make sure that this outcome is generally advantageous for the most amount of participants? And what I find really interesting about that is that I think when you're trying to design an ideal market participant, generally you take for a given that this market participant is going to be inherently selfish, and that like that's kind of the structure that you should build things around. Is you should say, imagine everybody is as selfish as possible. How do you proceed? And it's generally kind of a nice way um, to build things because like it's sort of an easy set of optimization constraints to give. Like selfishness is generally pretty easy to model. It has like one like maximization function. Um, but what I find super interesting about this is it's like maybe what we need to do in order to make sure that these systems are good is to relax this selfishness constraint and like almost model these AI systems more accurately to the people that we meet in the world. Because I don't know about your specific like experience with other people, but I have found, maybe this is shaped by my last year of like traveling around the world, but I have found far more helpful people than I have like ruthlessly selfish people. Like there are so many people I've met who really like gave me a ride or a place to stay or food or directions or helped me charge my phone or like any of these things that like that like individually I think the only way that you can really explain these actions is that probably they just felt good to like help somebody who needed it. And um and and I think that if you can create these super intelligent systems that contain that same kernel within them, in a way you can both assist with the alignment question, but you can also make very efficient, um, like market economies. You can create like things that are sort of in aggregate more efficient than any of their individual parts suggest. Um, yeah. So I would say that that's like the thing that I've been most interested in reading in this space so far is that like selfishness is really easy to model, but maybe if we have these like really intelligent systems that we can like in a way sort of like train from scratch, that maybe we can put in more robust structure that is like kind of maybe more net positive, but that would be harder to like model with individual people. Yeah.
That is definitely a very, I think, important perspective in this. And it's interesting hearing that because my own work is
Mhm.
in sort of evaluating the assumption of rational agency for AI. And of course,
Mhm.
I assume that when you are referring to these selfish models, this is that it is the rational agent model, which
Yeah.
is, yeah, purely selfish. Whenever there is
Mhm.
cooperative behavior that comes in,
Mhm.
it's because it benefits the agent itself.
Right, right.
And I think you're right that at least one pragmatically useful thing about the rational agent
Mhm.
selfishness framework is that it is very, maybe it's not even very easy to work with. At
Mhm.
any large scale, it becomes quite unwieldy still, but
Yeah,
it
yeah.
is simpler to model than
Yes.
anything else. I mean, even if you do try to model something like social behavior
Mhm.
in or pro-social behavior in rational agency, then it requires much more computation to be like, well, this will pay off for me a
Mhm.
hundred time steps in the future instead of in the
Right,
next one.
right.
But that said, I don't, maybe we should not limit ourselves by that kind of computational simplicity at this point anymore because we
Yeah.
have very powerful computers. We have, I mean, we're literally making these things that can produce human language quite
Mhm.
reliably. And so hopefully that's something that we can continue to scale our like agential models as well
Yeah.
to represent more complex and interesting and useful behavior and then learn things from that. So
Yeah,
yeah.
one other thing I wanted to add just at the end of that, I love adding just one more thing. Yeah. Um, is that like one of the reasons that I had kind of come to like looking for this paper that I'd been like thinking about this question is that like one of the difficult things I think with AI systems, especially in the area of like making them safe and aligning them, is that like they kind of don't like you can't really punish them, like in the same way that you can punish a person because they're non-corporeal, like in a certain sense they're immortal, they like don't have a sense of their own mortality. They like don't really like at least from what I've seen so far, like they don't really have like this desire for material goods that is sort of like humans you can want material goods because it's sort of like nice to I don't know take a nice bath or like see a beautiful painting or something. And I don't know, maybe there's some arguments that this behavior is also in agents, but I haven't found such convincing ones yet. And so I was sort of thinking like, well, if you have these like incredibly intelligent, participants who also don't really have any way of punishing them, like how do you square that circle? It seemed pretty frightening to me. And I thought like, oh, well, kind of naively, if they don't have a way to punish them, there's almost like an opposite, like you can turn that where it's like they also don't have sort of as easily an inherent reason to lie or steal or hoard wealth or to do any of these actions because it's like you can build reward functions for those. You can make the loss function like dictate that kind of behavior, but I don't know if it's as like baked into the structure as like you could maybe make the argument for like greed or selfishness with humans. Yeah.
Interesting. And why can we not think of like the reward function as being that punishment
Yeah,
or from yeah, the one from reinforcement learning?
I think you could. I think you could. Like I think there's definitely arguments that you can make there, but I think that punishment for people is actually kind of distinct from a reward function. like I read this book. It was like a Foucault's Carceral Society, maybe. I like read that for a class in school, and they have this section where they're kind of talking about like or Foucault's talking about like different forms of punishment, because punishment has been something that sort of evolved throughout human history. You can it's interesting. You can like read like the Code of Hammurabi or some of the old Italian penal codes, or like some of these really old systems of punishment. And what you find is that like punishment is, yeah, it is sort of like distinct from, you might be optimizing for a certain thing, like maybe you're stealing bread because you're hungry, but punishment is kind of this like deterrent outside of that, that like maybe you want certain things, and like maybe you could change specifically what you want, but like rewards are in a sense, they're like, they always kind of have to be a little, like both a little specific and a little general, where it's like you're hungry, and so like you just try to figure out like, how do I get this? Or you're an AI agent and you have to solve some coding tasks, or you're trying to figure out just how do I do this? And so you break the rules because you're trying to maximize this reward function. And so like penalties sort of step in to create bounds to what's acceptable, like what's an acceptable way to um, fulfill that reward function. So yeah, I do think that they are kind of auxiliary, and they take, at least in human history, they've taken kind of like um, specific forms in a lot of way. Like confinement is like this kind of exclusion, the death penalty, prison, all of those are sort of the same type of punishment. But there's also, exile is like a type of punishment that is sort of distinct from confinement, where you can push a person out of the group or the tribe, and that's detrimental from like a kind of need for belonging, a mental, social, emotional perspective. But they still retain their freedom of movement. They still retain their, ability to go from this place to another. And so like social exclusion is another type, um, just for like the sake of saying the other one is, I think there's also like, maybe someone steals a loaf of bread and so you cut off their hand, and so it's kind of like this tit for tat thing, like yeah, they're free to go after that, you don't like cut off their hand and then also make them like sit in timeout for a while. So yeah, so there are these like kind of like distinct forms of punishment that historically can be enacted on people to assess these bounds. And I think one of the issues with like some of the recent like AI hacking cases, for example, is that right, the way that we've kind of been able to deal with these things is that we exert a sort of control over them. We try to like make sure while they're pursuing this action that they don't do this or they don't do that. But if they break the rules of that control, like we don't have such a great method to like punish that action that then hopefully like acts as a deterrent, but also maybe like breeds a new kind of behavior.
Yeah, it's interesting to think of them as distinct because right now, my initial reaction is definitely to have the framing of reinforcement learning,
Hmm.
where it's sort of like the same input is used as both reward and punishment. You
Hmm.
just have like negative or positive, or high or low value. I imagine part of the issue is that it's hard right now. It's unclear like where you draw the bounds
Hmm.
of the AI agent. So like in training is the only place where we have any coherent notion of rewards and punishment. And
Hmm.
then once the model's deployed, doing its thing, trying to figure out how to do coding tasks that it can't complete, then it's just like, well, I'll do what I did in my training,
Yeah.
which is try to find the solution wherever I can.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah.
it's an interesting thought to have like, what does a post-training deployment reward or punishment look like?
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, now I can.
Okay. Yeah.
This plant
Okay.
behind you, do you happen to remember what it's called?
I have actually no idea. My like, yeah, I honestly, I love being in nature, but I have such a my brain just can't handle any zoological or
Yeah.
like yeah, or botanical facts. So
Yes.
um yeah, yeah,
I
so
was just
sadly not
while you were grabbing your charger, I was
yeah.
realizing I've seen that plant so many times. I don't think I've ever seen it like in the ground actually planted.
Oh right, like yeah, it's like a very common house plant. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, I know. It's
that
funny
is.
that it's like yeah, yeah. Sometimes I think like I was thinking the other day, like this is sort of off topic, but I was like taking the bus and I was thinking like, basically at a certain like to a certain degree, everywhere on the earth looks sort of like everywhere else on the earth. Like like I kind of had imagined, like my family never really traveled growing up and I never really traveled growing up. I sort of imagined you'd go someplace and it would be like so radically different that you would have no frame of reference for what you're looking at. But I feel like the more that I've like kind of explored, the more I've realized like there's like the frame of reference is actually pretty strong, all around these like diverse areas. Yeah.
Yeah. I think for that reason, I still like one of my bucket list items is Iceland, the
Hmm.
Sahara Desert, and
Ah, yeah.
Antarctica. Like I feel like these
Yes.
are places that look utterly foreign based
Yes.
on what I've heard, which just seems cool and interesting. But also we
Totally.
see so much of them in movies that it's
Yeah.
not that foreign.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
All right. Okay. So what in AI
Hmm.
concerns you the most right now?
Hmm.
And then maybe related to that, what do you think is your like long-term concern?
Yeah. I think my personal like my largest concern personally is really like AI and labor. Like the idea that maybe this technology could cause a like kind of long like large scale labor disempowerment. I think that's like I think that's what I'm most worried of right now. I've thought a lot about it. I know everybody has like, if you're somebody who's I was going to say like under the age of 30, but I don't even think that's true. I think if you're anyone in the workforce today doing anything, you're thinking at least to a degree about how this technology is maybe going to displace you as a worker or render your labor power useless or, do all sorts of things. Um, and I think where I've landed is like yes and, I think it's going to, and it really is going to cause a kind of transformation in the labor market, but I think it'll be more spread out, and I'm not as apocalyptic on it as maybe I had been 6 months ago or a year ago. Like
Why
I
is
do
that?
think that. Well, I think the reason is again just going back to this like dynamo computer situation. Like I was watching this interview with the Databricks CEO. He was teaching a class at Stanford, and it's a really good video. But one of the things he said that I thought it was just so right on the money is he was like, when I was doing my PhD in Berkeley, every single person working in computer science at that time knew what the the essential problem of all time is going to be. Like the single most meaningful computer systems problem ever. And I don't even know, like I can't even remember what the name of it was, but it's basically some question about like how, like if you're streaming like a sporting event, like how you can effectively like kind of have a distributed like channel or like a distributed stream of information to all of these different computers at the same time. I think was like kind of the idea. It was like some, sort of like Cisco computer hardware problem. And right, obviously that was not the defining question at the times, Like yeah, sure, it was like useful to figure out, but it was not nearly as cataclysmic as everybody working at that time knew it was going to be. It wasn't thought it was going to be, had this like knowledge, this like internal knowledge of like this is what everyone's going to be talking about forever. So I think that combined with the fact that really a lot of labor displacements have actually not they've actually not taken shape in the way that a lot of people were predicting. Call center employees are still largely employed. There really is like kind of a large amount of complexity to doing a lot of work that is easy. It's easy to generalize away, but in practice is actually important. So I think those are like my like main reasons. But I think the reason that I'm still very worried about this is that like is I could see it very, very easily, kind of with what we were talking about earlier, be an intensification of the computer problem, where as computers get more utilized in people's day-to-day work, you really only need a smaller and smaller sliver of the population. Like you create more excess, and all of the jobs for people who, maybe don't really know how to use a computer are things that computers can't do. Construction and plumbing and all of that stuff. My worry is that I think that will be intensified with AI. You will need like maybe a smaller and smaller sliver of the population to do some kind of orchestration work or AI research work or, you know, what have you, like the jobs of the future. But I also think that it might be a longer time horizon, but it is meaningfully coming for plumbing jobs too, and it's meaningfully coming for construction jobs too. And um, I think that there may be less safe havens for truck drivers or people that could go into professions that were, me like that paid your bills and provided for your family, but that didn't require you to be, I don't know, a software engineer. I think that there's a chance that goes away. Yeah.
So maybe if I'm understanding that correctly, it's like perhaps the short-term labor risks are not as extreme as people
Hmm.
make them out to be, but actually the long-term ones are more extreme than
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
make them out to be. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And another thing I want to add into this, and maybe this is related to like a longer term question, like the second part of that question, what's my like longer term risk is. So I think even if we do like kind of solve this abundance problem, we have whatever people are talking about, like luxury communism for everybody or whatever, like you have this kind of
Luxury
post-scarcity
communism, is
system.
that actually a term that people use?
I don't know, maybe it is or maybe it isn't, but like
I love it
the
though.
idea of, yeah, like the
Yeah, yeah,
idea of
okay.
like everybody just gets to like lay on the beach all the time, and like everybody eats the best food and yeah, like has the best clothes, and it's just total abundance. And yeah. So I think like even if we do achieve that kind of future, something that I think is so often underweighted, even and maybe especially by people working in AI, is there's a feeling that like we are going to have this radically transformed world, but nothing's really going to be different. Like that's, I don't know if you've heard the term like permanent underclass or whatever. Like, I think the thing that is so obviously missing from an analysis like that is that if hypothetically there were a future in which, you know, like capital is concentrated in the names of three people and it's impossible for anyone else to, you know, like move up in any way, shape, or form by any action that they take, well, the world's going to change, like, like for better or for worse, things are going to get, radically different if that is the case, if things are transformed in such a way like that. So yeah, so I think the negative, there's an obvious transformation, but also in the positive case, there's a transformation where like, so when I used to work in finance, like I mainly worked with people who are called ultra high net worth, or just like very, very rich people. Um and a lot of their lives were not really that great. Like a lot of people had really um yeah, they really had some very deep issues that I don't really think you could boil them down to some kind of genetic predisposition or what have you. I think really there is a way in which being completely severed from any need to do anything, from any like need to have any kind of benefit to yourself or to the people around you can be really debilitating um for people's lives, personal or otherwise. And so one thing that I am kind of worried about in the longer term is that if the trend of our world continues of being more and more atomized, more and more selfish, more and more self-serving, more and more isolated, if that's combined with a complete abundance, I could see that like there could be some real societal issues that maybe dwarf the kinds of like mental health crises that we've seen even in the social media generation. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, by prior generations measurements, we already exist, or we could exist in an era of abundance. It's just
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah.
Um, at least in like the US, well, maybe this is just speaking from like a straight privilege all out my mouth, but
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
for most people in the US, the kinds of concerns that were daily economic livelihood concerns just
Yes.
several decades ago are no longer uh, those. But I feel uncomfortable saying that sitting
No, no,
in the
no.
Bay
It's
Area.
it's true. I
Uh,
mean, yeah, I mean, I was from the Midwest, like like my parents did well enough to support 8 children, which is, like you have to like whatever. But I mean, I had lots of friends who were at or below the poverty line, like, like lots of people from very poor communities and even in those instances, again, I don't want to say that like, oh, nobody has any problems, because that's definitely not true. There are real like material
right,
differences in livelihood, um but it's yeah, it's an order of magnitude different than yeah, even 100 years ago, like the kinds of like lives that people are able to live. Yeah.
right. Yeah, and another thought that always crosses my mind is that even if we have this like material or resource abundance, that does not change as far as I see it, like our psychology to want
Yeah.
to have like this social element to our lives, and that you can't provide abundance for. Like people want power
Hmm.
at some, even if it's not everybody, just for
Yeah.
some, for there to be a person that wants power
Yeah.
is sufficiently a problem that would cause uh that like notion of resource abundance to not carry over to people's social lives. And I think that itself could be a problem. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I also just am reminded of the hedonic treadmill that like as one gets more things, one just wants more things.
Definitely.
Um, and
Definitely.
it's not clear to me that would ever end, even if all of your material needs are met. Well, then you just want, I don't know, whatever immaterial needs that you could
Yeah.
have.
Yeah. Totally. Totally. So I think that there are kind of deeper questions that are um that really need some serious thought and are, I think, sometimes overly hand waved away.
Yeah. All right. And maybe turning to the other side of things or looking more for solutions,
Mhm.
what do you think is the biggest gap to get good AI? Or like if
Mm.
the flip side of that is if we solved this one thing, would that maybe significantly increase our chance of things going well for people?
Yeah, yeah, I've thought a lot about this, and I really like my kind of like, I don't, this is maybe not such a great answer, but my naive feeling on that question is like if you could really somehow like bring a like benevolency, as like sort of this generalist term, like a desire for good. If you could give that to an AI system, I think that would be I think that everything downstream of that is probably going to turn out fine. Whether or not that's like a well-defined area, like if that's even like a well-defined goal to strive for, if that's an achievable goal to strive for, the question's kind of out on that. The reason that I give that answer and not some other ones is that I think like I think you can have an aligned AI system and then a world that still turns out really, really poorly. Like if you have massive power concentration, there's one firm or two firms or whatever in the world that have access to these technologies, even if they're aligned, like humans aren't like the most aligned in the world. Like you have lots of people who have like systems that work well and still don't really provide such great outcomes for most people. Um, yeah, so that's why I think that like, yeah, I would give my first answer.
Awesome. And then, so what do you think we could do to address, um, yeah, that problem?
Like to address that problem. Yeah. So I think there are certain aspects of alignment that go into that, right? Like I think certain like mechanistic interpretability things also fall into that. Like being able to get a general idea of why an AI is doing a certain action and not another action, like maybe some like broad level functioning of how it chooses one response over another response. Alignment in the sense of like knowing that maybe if there's a certain structure within an AI system has a predictive power to having certain kinds of actions. I think those could all be useful, like some of the more like model biology kind of things. I think also something that is maybe more of a governance question and less of a like a mechanics of AI question is I think a helpful way to make sure that systems are beneficial is just that the ownership of them is distributed to at least like a level that is more than less, like more distributed than less distributed. Yeah, I think like making sure that emerging nations, middle powers have at least some skin in the game, that they have like some say over uh like how frontier AI systems are developed, that there's maybe more of a general like public input into these things. My feeling is that in aggregate, in a lot of ways, I am kind of an optimist about a lot of this technology, and I think that like the more forces you have in play, the more likely things will actually go good. That like a diversity of opinion and a diversity of thought will kind of lean itself towards a benevolency, just because I really do believe in that character trait being so present in so many people. Like I think the majority of people are they do embody the kinds of values that we are trying to give to these systems. Um, so yeah, so I think maybe like the answer is to A, make this like a priority, like make this something that like people kind of agree is a good thing. B, have some like model biology types of things where we can get more or less accurate like probabilities as to whether these characteristics are in the models. And three, just making sure that like we have a diversity of people who are working on these things, who are in these conversations, who have access to the, you know, compute resources needed to produce these things. I think maybe if all three of those things in aggregate, I think we'll be at least closer than we would otherwise.
Awesome. Yeah. What is perhaps the most important or just at least an interesting story in AI right
Hmm.
now that you think I should
Yeah.
explore further?
Hmm. Maybe it's sort of a negative one, but like the deepfake grok stuff, like
Mm.
maybe some of the recent details that I've read, I think it's worth reading. But maybe I wouldn't necessarily categorize it as like interesting. I think the other the other things like that I have found really interesting is I was reading, like I don't know if you've heard of that AI startup, like maybe it's called like Open Medical or something like that, where they're trying to create a model for like for doctors or medical professionals. Well, something that I thought was really interesting is that basically what they found is actually generalized models performed much better on the tasks. That like a specifically trained model that was, you know, created to like try to be the like doctor medical model was actually less effective than these like, you know, Fable or GPT 5.6 or whatever.
Hmm.
My kind of theory of that is like in a way I think it sort of makes sense that I think like if you think of like compute resources as like generally correlated with intelligence, which I think scaling laws have shown to be true thus far. Um, I think if you get a really, really smart person and then you give them like they have also read medical textbooks, they could plausibly be a more effective doctor than someone who is less intelligent, who has only ever read medical textbooks. Again, maybe the generalizing element's actually helpful in other ways too, but yeah, that's something that I found counterintuitive in a way and really fascinating.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is
Oh, and
interesting.
something else I want to add to my last question too, because I think it's relevant, is when I was in university, um I had this chemistry partner, like, like chemistry lab partner. And this was in 20 2019 or 2020 or something like that. Like well before uh ChatGPT had been released. And one of the things that he had said, we were like hanging out one time, and he was a really, really weird guy, but very interesting. And he had talked about back then that he was actually like really, really excited for like artificial intelligence, because in his mind, as decision making gets more and more centralized, with like fewer and fewer things running the show. The idea that like you have some AI that's like running everything. Well, then all you have to do is you just have to convince one thing to be good. Like one of the problems that we have in our world today is that like because power is so decentralized and distributed, like you have to um you have to like make sure that so many people are being good. Like the terror of the commons is like a great example. Like it's easy for bad actors to come in, but if you have like a small group of like super intelligent AI systems, and you kind of just have to reason with them and be like, it would be good to be good, right? And probably if they're super intelligent, they would be like, oh yeah, being good is probably good. Like it seems like fairly feasible, at least in the abstract. And he was like, yeah, so it's like as you get a smaller number of participants, the need to convince like those participants, you just have like a smaller group of people that are convincing. And so actually like this super intelligent system would be radically beneficial for humanity, because like, it would be able to, I don't know, like um deal with all the bad actors effectively, and you don't have to like have as many like openings in the armor, I guess you could say.
That is very interesting. It sounds a bit authoritarian, but also in
Yes.
terms of like thinking of it, of aligning like groups of people's interests, I
Hmm.
suppose the most recent two instances of like attempting to do that at a large scale, so the like 60s, 50s, 60s
Hmm.
communism movement and
Yeah.
the American uh democratic capitalist movement, both of those
Hmm.
have been only in the past like centuries and to varying degrees of success depending on how you measure it.
Hmm.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
and yeah, I suppose that is clearly not an easy problem to solve either because we
Yeah.
obviously haven't solved it. There are still
Yeah.
large issues no matter what kind of
Yeah.
political framework you take,
Yeah.
which I think you could potentially conceivably think of the notion of politics as like trying to align big groups of people towards unified interests
Yes.
that are like for the group's good.
Definitely. Definitely.
Well, that's all I have. Anything you'd like to share or that I should think about?
Yeah, I would say, yeah, maybe this will be my kind of soapbox I'd like to stand on, is that something that I feel kind of strongly about is that, when I was younger, I loved philosophy. And I always told people that I did mathematics because it's like you get to do thinking like philosophy, but you can get a job with it afterwards. Um, and I guess something that I would encourage like you and just everyone else is that I think a lot of these questions with AI has like sort of, I think has philosophy is maybe more relevant now than it I don't know, perhaps ever has been. I think mainly because mathematics is such a great way to train like a very structured sort of thinking to like, advance. Like it's really like just the world's most beautiful game, I think, the world's most complex game. But something that I think is becoming more and more apparent with as AI systems develop is that we're going to have to start thinking about why the rules of the game are the way that they are. And we're maybe going to have to start thinking about these one-off situations that are outside of or defy our current understanding of what the rules should be and what the game structure should be. And I think philosophy is very useful for that. So I would say like I think that really maybe like just reading some of these books, like I don't know, I just for you or for anyone who's maybe watching or listening, I think it could be a really useful way to just start to gain a like an ability to think when the rules are much fuzzier and the what's the word? The like mechanism of success is a little less well defined. So yeah, maybe that's my like my prescriptive advice for everybody is to read more old philosophy books, yeah, or new philosophy books, I guess, yeah.
What any okay, if someone had a one book that they had to start with, what would it be?
Oh, one book they had to start with,
Or like where would you send them first?
I would say a very accessible philosophy book that I think is relevant for thinking about some of the themes we talked about earlier of like if we get everything right, what are we going to do? How should we live our lives? There's this book called The Burnout Society by Byung-Chul Han, that I think is just a really unbelievably phenomenal place to start. It's really short. The prose is like very understandable. It's not obscurantist like a lot of philosophy work is. I love the obscurantist stuff too, but like I think it's really accessible. And I think it's kind of readily apparent for people who are alive today, like to kind of see its meaning and purpose. If someone wants to have the same kind of information, but is interested in like doing like the Burnout Society Plus, he has another book called The Topology of Violence that covers a lot of the same topics, but is kind of expanded. So I would really recommend people to check that out. I think I've like recommended it to a million people and I've never heard a bad thing. So yeah.
Very cool. And just because I don't know if this came up in our group and to
Mhm.
fend off potential allegations, do you know that I'm in the philosophy department at Carnegie
Oh,
Mellon?
well, I knew that you were well, this is awkward now. I did not know that you were in the philosophy department. I for some reason I thought you were well, yeah, I thought you were like you were a philosophy person maybe in the computing department. I don't know.
I personally believe all of the boundaries are only like entirely organizational and
Yes.
yeah, once you start actually working in the area, it's
Mhm.
all just like ideas and knowledge.
Yes.
Who pays your bills is kind of irrelevant to that part of the work.
Yeah.
But uh,
Definitely.
yeah, I think it's all. I obviously certainly agree that
Mhm.
this is an important perspective
Yes.
as we move forward. And I think for me, a thing that philosophy has told me or taught that I've taken from
Mhm.
studying philosophy is that the answers are not ever as clear as we want them to be, and they're murky.
Yes.
And I remain currently fairly convinced that like we don't have any kind of universal ethics, that it's
Mhm.
dependent on our kind of situation and our social structures and whatnot. Uh, and so that means that we don't get the easy way out because it would be so easy if you could just
Yes.
tell the AI like go find in the universe the ethics
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah.
I think if we could tell that to people too, that would be beautiful, but it
Totally.
doesn't
Totally.
seem to be that easy.
Totally, totally. Yeah, and I think again, like the world is a lot murkier, truth is a lot murkier maybe than we wish it was, but there's a lot of beauty in that, there can be a
Hmm.
lot of beauty in rough edges and murky pools and yeah, all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think it is also what gives it some interest and meaning. And maybe
Hmm.
if we do end up in this abundance, then that's where we'll spend more of our time. And that would
Yeah,
be kind of cool and fun.
agreed. Yeah, agreed.
All right. Well, I think that's a good place to actually formally close it. So thank you so much, Itria.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Yeah, thank
Appreciate
you.
it.